So this is our first one for 2023. If you're a newbie, you are in for a great conversation. If you've joined before, you know how fun and exciting this is. But first up, we actually have a new monthly segment. This is called Coffee on the Moon. On the moon, obviously trying with my background, but if I was, who other to run this than the lovely Galaxis gal, Inara Tabir. And in this segment, Inara will be holding interviews to discuss our monthly topic and how through this topic of reference, we're going to work together to be a multi-planetary society. So Inara, without further ado, can you take it away? And let's meet your fantastic guests that we're going to be hearing from.
Thank you so much, Meredith. I'm excited to be back here with Foundation for the Future for Conversations for the Future, seeing some new faces here. And if you don't know my brand, Coffee on the Moon began with the way that I got involved in space. There's not one way to get in, there's many different ways. And my way was that I built a social media following. I didn't have an education, but I had that, and I went to these different space companies and I would say, I can blow up what you're doing, I can make it huge, I can make the public care about it, and I don't want any money. I just want you to give me a chance. So they would, and I would make it happen. And they would ask me, what do you want in return for this? They were always looking for some sort of like price, money, a job or something. And I would say, I want two things. The first one is, if I bring a meeting to you from someone else, you take the meeting. You don't have to give them what they want, but you have to take the meeting. And the other one is, if you get to space before me, you take me with you and we have a coffee on the moon. So 16 years later, this has been very effective, and I've gotten extremely well connected, and I'm part of different communities. One of those is the I-24 community, which I recently joined. Amazing group of people that are dreaming together and working on going to space. And the founder and leader of that organization is Andrew Titan Parris. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to read this bio because you and I have a couple different connections besides space. It says that you have, two or three-time Emmy Award winner in broadcast television. I want to hear about that.
Oh, well, my real job that pays the bills. I'm a broadcast television engineer. I've been working in the industry, well, most of my life. I grew up in it. My dad was in it, but my specialty is remote television broadcasting. And so I work for a company called NEP Group that provides all the remote television equipment and personnel for all the networks around the world. And the 3 Emmys were technical Emmys for different projects. I think one of them was the Summer Olympics in Rio, and then 2 from the ESPN 3D shows that we did from 2010 to 2013.
Fantastic. When I talk to the public, oftentimes because of the amazing nature of the Apollo era, where we created these larger than life superheroes out of the astronauts, people think the only way to get involved in space is to be a fighter pilot, or to have a military background. Did you come from a military background?
No, absolutely not. I was like I said, I'm television, the family business. My dad started in television back in the mid 50s. I have 3 other brothers who were all in television, but we were the Apollo era. We were the kids growing up in the 60s watching the moon landings. In fact, my first real vivid memory of the space program was the Apollo 8 Christmas Eve broadcast from around the moon. And that's the point I realized, hey, this is something to look toward, to aspire to. Being an astronaut, every kid wanted to be an astronaut, but I became very serious. I started writing NASA, getting flight plans and orbit maps and autograph pictures and stuff like that. So I got the space bug. I got bit by the space bug at a very early age.
So from that point to broadcast television, and now with I-24, what led you into this more organized path as far as space goes?
Well, I actually was fortunate enough to work for NASA for 13 years, from 1987 to 2000, doing television. First 3 years doing shuttle landings out at Dryden Flight Research Center, which is now, of course, Armstrong. And then from 1990 to 2000, working in Houston for the Johnson Space Center. And as a contractor, I got to do a lot of everything. I got to scuba dive in the NBL and the WETF with the astronauts doing EVA training. I got to fly 0G for a couple of years. That was one of the best experiences I could ever have. I got to travel for NASA quite a bit, documenting space station construction all over the country. In fact, got to go to Moscow 3 times. Got to go document the launch of the first space station crew from Kazakhstan. So it was a dream come true, being able to tell my job, television, but doing it at NASA and experiencing and meeting people and astronauts and the whole 9 yards. Unfortunately, as a contractor, you have a limited lifetime at NASA, and so I left in 2000. But fortunately, I'd been working with Mark Cuban to start the first all high definition television network called HDNet. So I got to go work for him for 5 years and then moved over to NEP that in 2005. But space was always something I wanted to do. And it was inspiration for that. It got me back into it, as it's done for many people. It got me thinking, yeah, that's something I left behind. I want to go back, and I want to go back big. I want to go to space. And so signing up for the Inspiration 4 contest, the charity seat, was the first start. And then along the way, there was a whole bunch of us who had all entered for one reason or another, and we started communicating on Twitter, and we kind of all connected. And so at the launch, for the Inspiration 4 launch in September of 2021, we all met up, and we actually had a dinner the night before the launch. And we're all talking and just enjoying each other's conversation. At one point during the dinner, the music in the restaurant died down, and I said out loud, almost uncontrollably, I said, you know, somebody at this table is going to fly in space. And everybody's like, yeah, it's pretty cool. Well, our group decided to kind of organize, after a few months of staying in communications after the launch, we decided to organize as the Inspired 24. And the reasoning behind that was there were 24 of us at the dinner, excuse me, and we were all very inspired. Inspiration 4 inspired us, so we started Inspired 24. Anyway, we're about 88 folks strong, including Trek. That's Inara's call sign. Mine's Titan. That was given to me. And my prediction actually is almost completely come true. Organization, aerospace company called Uplift Aerospace out of Park City, Utah, started a Web3 organization called Space Plus. And they had, in April of last year, they had essentially a contest where they would pick 5 people from the group, from their Web3 group, and one of them would win a seat on New Shepard. And of the 5 finalists, 4 of them were Inspired 24 members. And the winner was Ruben Salinas, one of our founding members, is going to be flying on New Shepard next year. And we're above and beyond proud that our group has done so well so quickly. And we just draw people from all over the world. We're now in South Asia, Australia, South America, and Europe, and all over the United States. It's just something that came together so organically. It's tough to keep your hands on it, but we don't want to, I'm trying not to control it too much. It's kind of a mutual admiration society at some point, but we're really just about helping each other eventually experience the overview effect.
You know, I love that you're using that word inspiration. It's so important. One of the big parts of inspiration is hope, and knowing that you have something you can do with that. And right now I see it, you know, the Apollo era obviously has galvanized and inspired so many people to go into the sciences, to dream that they can do bigger things. And I was worried for quite a while that we were going to lose any kind of ability to connect with the public. But then we saw the rise of SpaceX and Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, and people started getting excited. And unfortunately, sometimes they like the explosions more than the successes. But, you know, through experiential marketing, I think the public has come back on board. What does it mean to you when you're thinking about going to space? I know you're inspired by the Apollo era and you dream about being an astronaut. You've got that as your basis, but the thought of going to space, walk me through that. If you're up there and you're looking out at the Earth from space, what is that moment for you?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I've actually had a couple of dreams in my adult life about going into space, and they were very vivid and very specific. They involved spacewalking and essentially looking down on Earth. And there have been some VR movies shot on the ISS that I've experienced, and they're very close to those dreams. But my moment is looking down on the Earth, looking down and taking it all in. I mean, you can see all the pictures, you can do all the VR you want, but being able to actually look out that window and see everybody on the planet who's ever lived, you're looking at your home. It's almost beyond description to me at this point, but it's definitely an inspiration. I started volunteering at Space Center Houston last year, which is another source of my inspiration, being able to talk to the public and being able to engage the average everyday person who just wants to come and learn a little bit about it, especially the kids. The kids are amazing. I can't get enough of them. As a volunteer, I try to engage them as much as I can. I play a little game called Stump the Volunteer, ask them to ask questions. And believe it or not, recently I've gotten stumped a couple times, and I consider myself a bit of a space historian.
So give me a couple of those stumped moments. I'd love to hear those.
Oh, there was a young woman who probably 11 or 12, who was obviously well on her way to her doctoral thesis on deep space exploration, had a question about black holes. And I just know a little bit enough about black holes to know I don't know anything about black holes. But she had obviously studied up on them, and she was asking about the event horizon and at what she wanted to know at what point the physics breaks down. I'm like, oh, you mean like how far away? And she's, yeah, about how many kilometers before our physics break down. I'm going, yeah, sorry, you win. Here's a sticker.
I love it. The kids are all right. Definitely. This next generation is becoming very enthusiastic about it. You know, Inspiration 4 did such an amazing job. I was upset, I think maybe worried about the way we were covering space up until that moment, because I felt like we had these great moments happening, these beautiful stories that could have been told. And I wasn't seeing that story development. You and I both come from Hollywood to some degree, and watching Inspiration 4, we got a little bit more of that buildup of the anticipation and understanding who was going and what it meant for them. And so we kind of got to go along with them. I'd love to see more of that, though. From your perspective as a communicator, where are we missing the mark, and how can we improve the way we engage with the public long-term when it comes to space?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's sometimes it's tough to tell those stories in a way that the average person can relate to. It's all about reliability. And it's, for example, Inspiration 4, you had 4 people who were, lack of a better word, not randomly, but I mean the Chris Dombrowski seat was a random selection. But it's tough just to keep people's attention sometimes. I think there's so many other things out there, social media, movies, internet. There's so many other things to keep people's attention. So you've got to find that little hook, and the Inspiration Formation was very good at that, in that it was the first of many things: first private commercial flight, first female black pilot, first handicapped person to fly with a disability. And so it's a matter of finding those little hooks to get people's attention. You're not going to get everybody's attention for long term, so you got to be able to find those little things that catch people's attention, but also just keeping the news out there, keep talking about it. And that's really the most important part, is just keep talking about it, especially like the overview effect. It's something we can't talk enough about.
For sure. Well, the relatability, I think, is really critical. The 2 big barriers I experience when I talk to the public about space, one is usually this idea that space is really far away, that any idea of humanity going into space in a big way, besides, you know, a small camping trip, is 1,000 years away. It's funny because somewhere there's some textbook I'm not aware of that uses that terminology or that exact measurement. I keep hearing this. It's 1,000 years away. You know, I'll speak to people and they'll say things like, "Oh my God, this is so great. It's so inspiring. I really love all of that, but isn't that like 1,000 years away?" So I think one of our critical, you know, missions is to help the public understand that we're living in the era of space migration, that we are now living in an era when humanity will go out into space and stay there long term. And so that's, I think, one big piece of it. And the other part of it is that once you help them figure that out, oftentimes it's like, oh my gosh, okay, it's happening right now, but how could I ever be part of that? And I had some guy one day say to me, you know, I would love to be involved in the space industry, but I don't have any skills that they need. And I asked him what he did, you know, what are the skills? And he's like, oh, I'm a computer programmer. And I about fell over, you know, I'm like, listen, we've got room for you. There's a place out there. So I think it's important that, you know, and the other part of it really is that people need to know that they can play part of this, they can be a part of it, but also it impacts them in a way that matters. So a lot of people may see that it's happening now and that they could be part of it, but they are like, this is wasteful. Why aren't we doing this other great thing we should be doing? And it can be anything between, you know, like ending ecological distress or, you know, feeding the homeless. You know, they have their idea of what should be done instead. So I want to help people understand the importance of space. And if that means that they're an environmentalist, and I help them understand that we wouldn't have known how bad the RLC was retreating if we didn't have satellite imagery, or we wouldn't even understand climate change to any great depth without the techniques that we're using from space. Or it's, you know, showing them the instruments that were created that they use in their everyday lives because of the space program. But I want to find some way to help the public feel like this is something that they can be part of, that it is part of their story. I look at Hollywood and, you know, we spend $600 billion a year to entertain people, and they find so many levels of connection and meaning. Is there a way for us to find those layered connection points for people in space, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, the Hollywood and the movie industry as a whole is a very big part of that. They have the power, they have the tools. And as far as you were mentioning, people talking about we have more, well, why are we going to space? We have more important things we need to take care of. I'm going to borrow a line from a friend of mine, Mike Mungo. He uses, and it's the most succinct one I've heard for so far, is solve for space, solve for Earth.
Absolutely.
Everything we live with today, all the modern technology. It's something else I talk about in giving tours, like of the Saturn V rocket at the Rocket Park at Space Center Houston, is we owe our lives, our current technology, everything we have is a result of the Apollo, the race to the moon. The technology we've developed all has come from that. And so it benefits it benefits everyone to develop this new technology. We learn how to live in space. We learn more about our planet and how to save it, and about the other planets too. Or all the exploration we're doing on Mars, finding about what happened to the water, so forth, can help us see the problems we have here on Earth.
Absolutely. Well, and I would say we could even go one step further. We can talk about these large scale problems, whether it's ecological distress or racial conflict or world hunger. All of these are really the result of an infinitely expanding species, although we hope infinite, and a planet that's not expanding. We have only so many resources, so much space. And so if we look at solving these big problems, which do deserve to be solved, we want to, alleviate these sort of distresses with humanity. Space is the best solve for that. If you're talking about the resource scarcity, space is abundance. When we're looking at things like gold and diamonds, this is nothing out. There's so much out there. So I think we can make the point that these things they care about, we also care about them. And when I think about Earth, Earth is wonderful and beautiful and majestic, but it's a small town in a very big world. So when I'm thinking about, the planet Earth being our entire world, really it's just a small town, and we can get out there into the bigger world and discover all these other things that we can do and we can reach. So that's the message I want to try to get across to people. With I-24, you start off with this dinner and you want to go to space, and other people do as well. And you find this commonality, you're building a community around it, which I think is really beautiful that we can do this, where it used to be neighbors talking with each other and having barbecues over the Apollo era. Now we can build these interlocked communities globally focused on this topic. Where does it go next? You grow the membership for I-24 and everyone ends up going to space. What's next for the group?
Well, that's a good question. We're always looking to the what's next, and we look for a lot of input from our members. The group is essentially just a loose connection at this point, but because we encourage everyone to do their own thing, and then we help each other and support each other in many things. If in theory everybody gets to space, obviously we want to come back and tell their stories. I know Ruben is very anxious about going to tell his story. In fact, Ruben and I have both signed up to fly on the Worldview, the stratospheric balloon rides to 100,000 feet, which I can't even, I'm so excited about it, and that's still 2 to 3 years away. But he mentioned that his flight is only going to be, a 10-minute suborbital flight, but he wants to have the time to look down on the Earth, to spend time looking down and experiencing the overview effect and coming back and talking about it. And that's the really most important part of this stuff. Going to space it's part of our natural instincts to explore. That's the next place we can go, or explore the next go over the next hill, go over the next continent, whatever. But telling the story, coming back and telling the story helping to inspire other people to see us as a multi-planet society. We obviously, as a species, we like to, we can't sit still. And this is just part of the natural progression of it.
There's this phenomenon that happens when you travel. I'm sure you have the same thing. I've traveled and lived all over the world. And when I was in Paris at one point, I heard somebody with a similar accent to mine, and instantly we connected. They were speaking English the way I speak English. And it's like, let's go have a coffee. We're best friends now. And this tends to happen when you're in an area where you are small and everything around you is really massive, and you can connect with one or two people. It doesn't matter who they are. You may have walked past them in your hometown without looking at them, but in this space, suddenly you're allied together. And I think with space, it's the same thing. When we go out into space, it's massive and we're tiny. And I think that kind of circumstance could make a unified humanity a reality in a way that we can't really see on planet Earth. So I'm interested to see if the overview effect can translate into a civilization that can get a couple of things a little bit better than we do here. I want to give the audience a little bit of time to ask questions. Meredith, do we have the ability to get some questions to Andrew?
Yes. So first off, this is great, by the way. I'm excited. Being a journalist here myself and a storyteller, I can relate to both of you. Let me take a look here. I'll ask a question first, and then I'll go through and I'll kind of, scope the questions out for you. Andrew, there's a lot of people out there in the media that, these stories are not being told properly. You see press releases that are regurgitated and read. What could the media community do better to help with storytelling? And, does it start with, getting people like yourselves to come and talk with us? Or is it just, taking that story and maybe having your scientist or your expert on space at the station, taking that story and taking it to the next level?
Both would be good. Would be excellent for that. You obviously, there's a lot of regurgitated stories. There's a lot of clickbait stories too. Unfortunately, people are looking for those kind of quick clicks. But yeah, absolutely both. Bringing people like myself and others to talk and tell their stories, which is the best way to tell a story is somebody just tell their story. But also, once you get a story, find something that the science reporters, science communicators find interesting and think other people would be interested in too also. But yeah, it's just a matter of communications. We're in the communication business, so we should be communicating.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And I think, it is getting more like yourselves and having coffee with Inara and getting these things out on places like LinkedIn where there is more visibility. Because yes, we're doing a lot of great things in the space community, but it's still, until it's properly communicated to the general public, and let's face it, unfortunately, a lot of people still rely on news. I mean, good for me, for my job, but people turn to the news, people turn to websites and social media. They need people that are going to tell the truth, that are going to have the facts out there. So It's good to hear what you guys are doing. So I'm just looking at a few questions. I think somebody wanted to hear a little bit more about this balloon ride, Andrew, that you were. You're like, wow, this is really
Worldview.
I went to something here in New York. It looks really interesting.
Yeah. Worldview is one of, I believe, 3 companies is planning stratospheric balloon rides to 100,000 feet. Worldview's actually been in the business longest. They've been around since 2012. They've been putting payloads to 100,000 feet, scientific and commercial payloads to 100,000 feet. Essentially, they've developed the ability to loiter. They have a helium-filled balloon, zero pressure helium balloon, and they can take it up to to whatever altitude the customer wants. And then they figured out how to use the winds, the high altitude winds, to loiter over certain parts of the country. I know they had a payload that they had over the going up and down the Rocky Mountains for like 45 days. But they're going to be doing a passenger, commercial passenger is going to be a 10-person capsule, 2 crew, 8 passengers. And I said the flight is about a 10 to 12 hour flight, 1 to 2 hours up to altitude, 6 to 8 hours at altitude. So you'll get to be at 100,000 feet for 6 to 8 hours, get to experience the overview effect. You'll be above 99% of the atmosphere. Not only Ruben, myself, but 19 other friends of mine have all signed up. So this has become a very big deal for us. The seats are $50,000. That is quite a chunk of change for your average person. But if you look at the other options, which are millions of dollars for suborbital flights, and even some of the other balloon rides are several $100,000. We joke we like that everybody else's budget is marketing for the champagne and caviar, where we're going to be flying on the beer and pretzels flight, and to us that's a good thing, because we like to go up there, and we're actually considering doing our own science while we're on board, taking cameras to high altitude photography, even some astronomical photography. I'm working on a ham radio project to contact with the International Space Station. My great-grandfather was a ham radio operator for the Union Pacific Railroad, and so the possibilities are endless for that kind of thing.
And I think something like that also inspires that there's room for everybody in space with every different background, whether you're a radio operator, whether you're the postman. I mean, there's so many ways, different directions we're going. And this could go to either one of you. Somebody was commenting on how most people outside the space community don't see the importance of space migration. How can we get that out versus just having stuff on Netflix or videos for people to watch? How can we talk about this and get the conversation going?
Inara, you can start off.
Sure, absolutely. It's a really good question. When you look at the Apollo era, people were extremely excited of the fact that humanity could just get to space. And so, when Kennedy said, we're going to do this by the end of the decade, it was this inspiring, flaming moment. We all caught fire. We're like, what do you mean we're going to go to space? Now, I think space is no longer really the barrier that it was. It's still going to be hard. It's still a lot of work. It still takes so much, but we need to move beyond the point where, it's a barrier. And if we look at the ocean as an example, people in the past, learning to circumnavigate the globe, for instance. It was a huge barrier. And when people did this, it itself was an inspiring act, but then we didn't leave it there. We organized global trade and we created routes. And as a species, we spread out across the entire globe. We didn't allow this barrier that we had crossed to become the monument. We went beyond that. And so with space, we have to migrate. We have to live permanently. We have to spread out and explore beyond what we currently know. And I think, you said it, Titan, it's in us. It's who we are. We're explorers naturally. We're always going to push the next boundary. And I think it's what really differentiates us as a species is that we're not comfortable being comfortable. We're always seeking discomfort and what's beyond the next horizon. So for me, I don't know if it's a matter of convincing the public, but I think it's a natural drive. We're not going to be happy with, this boundary we've crossed. We're always going to want to push a little bit further.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. Plus, one of the best ways that we can communicate space is lead by example. I think that's probably one of the best ways of doing it. But the sheer act of doing, I like to say, is you just go do it and people say, hey, it can be done. I'm not, I wanted to be an astronaut. When I was a kid, I remember the day I found out you couldn't be an astronaut if you wore glasses. I wore glasses as a child. And so that was, a bit of a barrier. But now anybody can go into space. In fact, I had somebody ask me today about what are the requirements for flying on Worldview to the 100,000 feet. Basically, they're using, if you can get on an airliner, you can go on the balloon. So that means that opens it up to literally everyone. If you can get on a commercial airliner, you can go. And I started actually working with Astro Access, George Whiteside's group for people with disabilities and inclusion. And we just had a zero-G flight. I actually was volunteering for them earlier in December in Houston. They were about 5 miles from where I live. So I volunteered to help out, just pick up drinks and stuff like that. Well, they had a weather delay and I ended up getting to fly with them, filling in for one of their safety guys. So I got to fly zero-G twice last year, which was an amazing experience. But getting to work with people and see proof that people with disabilities can in fact go into space, can get in and out of their seats, 5-point harnesses. That was part of the experiments, and all kinds of different experiments they do. That right there helps prove that, hey, if people with limb disabilities or sight disabilities or hearing disabilities can go to space, then that means everyone can, and we can all experience that and help share that with everybody.
I like the way that Tim Crispin puts it. He's the founder of Foundation for the Future. He says, we need to make space boring. And I completely agree. When the Wright brothers first achieved flight, that was global news. It was a huge issue. And now we're all just jumping on planes and hopping all over the globe. So we need to get to the point where there's just field trips to the moon and people are bored and they don't want to go. I think that's where we can really start making a huge impact. I'm excited for Mars personally, but there's just so much to see out there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we've got another question for Titan. Titan, if we're mentioning space colonization anyway, how does one make a living by living in space? And what are the most likely near-term occupations that will be able to generate enough income to justify the costs off of living on Earth? That's a great question.
That is a very good question. In fact, that kind of goes to something that is becoming kind of an issue, is building the economy in space. You're not going to be able to, when you go refuel your space vehicle on the moon at the lunar outpost, they're not going to take a credit card and they're not going to take cash. So that's where the Web3 community is coming in. Being able to use cryptocurrency is part of the realities of living in space. You're right about, we want to make space boring. We want to make it the kind of thing like, right now I have to get on a plane. I flew here from Houston to Hawaii for work. That's going to become the norm in the future. You get on a space plane or a vehicle and you end up, I got a meeting on the moon, or I got to go to Mars for a long-term project kind of thing. That's the kind of thing we want to do. And so as far as jobs are concerned, every job that you can think of that is required on Earth will be necessary in space. I mean, even the short term in the next, within the next 10 years with all the commercial space stations coming online, they're not going to be hiring astronauts. They're going to be hiring engineers and scientists and technicians who happen to go work in space. And that'll what it'll be. You'll apply for a job and it'll be, maybe a 6-month stint on the moon, or a 2-year turn on Mars, or maybe they'll look for people to settle Mars. They want a permanent position there for a plumber. Every job you can think of, they need those people in space. And the short term, it's like I said, it's going to be a few people, but eventually, as we start to reach out and settle different planets and moons, those economies will grow within on their own needs, I guess is the way to say it. And so there'll be, you'll need people to make that all work. Robots can only do so much. We need people out there too.
Absolutely.
Point. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I can't wait till we have, job postings for fast food on the moon, and that's when we know we're going to have made it. Well, Andrew.
Taco Bell on the moon. Sorry, I had to put that out there. That would be really out of this world. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, Andrew, Titan, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. So Daniel, you posted a question in the chat, but we're actually going to be introducing you in just a moment, so we can actually dive into that.
Well, thank you for having me on. Yeah, I put in my 2 cents there. That IP is really easy to transport. Genetic code for plant engineering and any other code-based IP would be maybe a good economic output.